Welcome to this Fane online event, A Night with Tom Allen. I'm Viv Groskop and I'm thrilled to welcome you tonight. I'm going to be speaking to tonight's guest for about an hour, putting lots of questions to him about his life and his new book, which we're celebrating at this event. We're thrilled to welcome you tuning in across the world. We're speaking to you from London tonight, but please do remember that this event is going to be available on demand for the next week. So if you'd like to watch it again, you could, or do let your friends know if you know anyone who'd like to watch it again. It'll be available for a week. So let me introduce tonight's special guest.
Yeah.
It is Tom Allen, and we're here to celebrate his first book, brand new memoir, No Shame. Of course, Tom, you will not need any introduction in tonight's company, but
Wow.
many of you will know him from Mock the Week, 8 out of 10 Cats, and of course, his stellar work on The Apprentice, You're Fired, and I hope we will talk about this a lot, Bake Off. Welcome, Tom Allen.
Oh, Viv, what a lovely introduction. I feel this is a very formal, grown-up event, and as is correct for such a grown-up book.
Exactly. Well, you are an author now.
I know.
And this is perhaps, because the book has come out this week, perhaps your first author event?
This is my first author event, which I'm realising, I think author events are quite serious, aren't they? Like, not serious, but like very grown-up.
Well, the positive side is you have been dressing as an author for your
That's
entire
true,
life.
Actually, I have. Sometimes an author, sometimes a sort of errant estate agent. So sometimes I get it right, sometimes I get it wrong. But that's life, isn't it?
Talk us through your choices of today's outfit.
Oh, thank you for asking. Well, today I like navy blue, so I thought that's my favourite, and I quite enjoy the contrast of brown and pink in a sort of Neapolitan ice cream type way. So I've dressed as a Neapolitan ice cream.
Love it. Bit of a Bake Off tribute maybe there.
You could say that, I suppose. You could say that, yeah. But then some people say that's a very dour tie. Why haven't you worn a brighter tie? But I sometimes like to. I'd say let the book do the talking.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? That's what people say at book festivals and that, isn't it?
Yeah.
Hey on why? Is that one of them?
Let the book do the talking.
Let the book do the talking.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Love it.
I bet.
Now, tell us, what did you want to achieve with this book? Because this isn't, I mean, I think there's no such thing as a conventional memoir anymore. It used to be that if a celebrity wrote their autobiography, it would all be about their tales from the dressing room with Joan Collins, although you do have a little bit of that. But it's more of a, it's not a literary memoir, but it's kind of serious. It's got a serious point to it.
Well, thank you for saying that. I've always wanted to write a book, and I've always kept a diary, and I've always enjoyed stories, and that's kind of been the foundation of stand-up for me. I've always liked just anecdotes, really. But I had all these diaries and these stories in my head that I'd always wanted to commit to paper. And so the events of the last year meant that I had time to sit down and diligently commit them to the page, which of course is very cathartic. And writing a book, I always think, should be vulnerable. It's different to stand-up because it has that much more weight to it, literally. But also it does. And so you write it down and then you send it off and then you forget that people are going to read it. You go, oh, I hope, what did I say? Did I say anything terrible? Or anything, anything sort of going to be embarrassed about? And then it's like, no, that's the point of the book. And for me, it feels like at this point in time, and also in my own experience, shame has been around and has felt like for so many people like quite a pernicious voice, either in our heads or even in the media. And it feels like now we're at this crossroads where we've had this pandemic where we can all sit and think and work out what we want to be. And I think we're at a point where people, I hope, will start to think about what they want the world to be. And my instinct is that people should do that with no shame and should do that with full exuberance. I felt sometimes when I was at school and growing up that it was, don't stick out, don't be too much, don't make a show of yourself, don't embarrass yourself. And I've sort of carried that, and it's to do with being gay, but also just, I think, being eccentric and as well. And so I wanted to write something that kind of countered some of those more negative voices, and hopefully, I think we're at a time when people will start to live with less shame.
Yeah. Oh, I love what you've just said. It's gone very Oprah early on.
Has it?
Love that.
Oh,
Yes.
that's nice.
It's inspiring, but it
Oh,
really reflects the message and the tone of the book, because the
well, thank
book
you.
is very you and it's your stand-up self and it's very funny, but it is, as you say, also quite vulnerable. Were you surprised when you were writing it that sometimes doing that behind closed doors, writing down your own thoughts is almost feels more exposing than stand-up, which is surely one of the most exposing things that anyone can do?
Well, I think I've always felt with comedy and with all sort of performance and with all arts, really, it's about making people feel less alone. I think so often we live in our own heads and we kind of spend time now on our phones, sort of often feeling quite isolated. And for me, comedy has always been a way of reaching out to people and going, I feel embarrassed about this thing. And people go, oh, I felt that too. And the laughter is about recognizing it and a laughter of relief, I hope, that people go, I thought I was the only one. And we laugh together because we're all together in the room. We go, oh, there's lots of us. And that's a lovely feeling. But for me, the book felt like the next stage of that, because, of course, you're not always chasing a punchline. Stand-up particularly is about you always have that beat, that rhythm, that you have to have a point where people have that laughter moment, where the valve is released and people go, oh no, yes, that's right. But with a book, you can go off on to stories which feel more personal, and you're not chasing that so much. And there are hopefully moments which make people laugh, but as well, I wanted to offer something where people go, oh, that's me as well. And you can talk about the nuances and the subtleties there. And when it's just you and the reader, it feels a very personal, intimate experience. And so I wanted to honor that by committing the vulnerabilities I felt to the page.
Yes. And there's a journey towards that conclusion through the book, because it doesn't start with you feeling no shame,
No.
does it?
No. And in a sense, I had to define it quite early on, what I was talking about. But I think I felt it as a child at times, and could never take my clothes off in the swimming pool. Grown up, so my parents were like, oh, don't worry, nobody's looking at you. And, and of course, that was just their way of reassuring me. And it's wonderful they did that. But I could never sort of shake off this sense of shame about myself. And that extended, I suppose, into going to school and feeling different. And at times the book is about me coming to terms with my sexuality, but at times it's just coming to terms with being an eccentric. And I felt at primary school even that very self-conscious and aware of myself, and that something I didn't feel like I fit in. At times I thought I was a 46-year-old trapped in a child's experience, and was always, there's been a mistake in the universe and somehow I shouldn't be here. And I'd be made to sit at the child's table at weddings. Like, I shouldn't know, this isn't right. I want to be sat over there, the adults. And then I'd be invited around to a friend's of mine's house for tea, for a play date, as they call them now. Play date. Why do they have to sexualize everything? Just going around, and I wouldn't really be interested in playing. I'd be much more interested in talking to their mum. And so I always felt like I was different and strange. And at times it was completely fine and embraced. But yet I always had this sense that I wasn't at ease with myself in the world. And that became more so, I think, in my teenage years, when for so many of us, I think secondary school, high school is a very frightening time, especially if you're like, the school I went to was a comprehensive school in Bromley. There were lots of positives about it, but fundamentally you're thrown in when you're 11. So you've been at primary school where you're very much a child, and then you're thrown in with these sixth formers who are literally adults, and you're just expected to just find your way. And there's good learning in it, but it was very, I was very much aware that I was different. I was realizing I was gay, fancying the other boys in my year, and suddenly very frightened of that. And I then had to compound that by hiding it, because there was no way at my school you could ever talk about being gay, about your sexuality. So and it's difficult to explain that now, but literally the teachers weren't allowed to say it's okay because of Section 28. And there weren't as many positive role models, really. You didn't see gay people on television, and they certainly weren't openly gay, and newspapers were still shaming people if they came out, or it wasn't that they came out, often they were found out, which really feels like a hangover from, the time when it was illegal and people were blackmailed. So it was very frightening, I thought, and there weren't positive messages around it. It was so much, there were stories about people being beaten up, about queer bashing, and violence through, say, there was the the nail bombing at the Admiral Duncan in Soho, I remember as a teenager. And all those things, I think when you see them, you go, oh, this is not a good thing that I am. I need to do everything I can to. I didn't want to change it, but I just knew I didn't want to talk about it. I wanted to push it down.
Yeah, I want to come back to this because
I've gone off on a ramble there.
You've gone on the correct ramble. I want to come back.
It's the only thing we can do these days is ramble.
Quite. Right. I was slightly shocked that you had felt this way about your sexuality because I'm a bit older than you, and I like to think that anyone who's younger, they must be so accepted now, and it must be in my little rose-tinted world. So I want to come back to a bit to that because I do think lots of young people will really identify with that, and it's quite shocking. But for people who don't know about your background, which if they've seen your stand-up, really they should, tell us what sort of family you grew up in, what sort of house, what environment, because this isn't a story about your parents and your people around you rejecting you, is it?
No, absolutely not. And I come from a very loving family. They are Londoners, normal, whatever that means, Londoners. I mean, they're not I don't think there's anything boring about them, though. But I always had this posh voice for no reason. My dad was a coach driver before he retired, and my mum worked in the Army and Navy, which was a department store in Bromley. It's not part of the military. And so my dad grew up in Penge, which people always laugh at because it sounds like minge. And so Dad says, I'm not from Penge anyway. I'm not from Penge. I'm from Annerley, which when you think about it, Annerley sounds much worse anyway. So Dad's there. Mum grew up in Sydenham, and they moved to the suburb of Bromley to bring up myself and my brother. And Bromley is, in many ways, a wonderful place, and it's the epitome of suburbia. And like in the film Pride, it's the place they choose to represent sort of the boy who's coming to terms with his sexuality, and he's called Bromley. And so it's very much famous for being, I guess, quiet and a little bit curtain twitchy and a bit judgy and, dare I say, boring. And as I've got older, there are great positives to a bit of boringness because it's quiet and nice and you can have a garden. And I've realized that's something that's quite nice. And I suppose I've always quite liked that. But growing up, maybe there were times when I felt that it was there wasn't anything happening. Like there wasn't, and if there was, it all felt like, I don't know, there was a sort of, it's quiet there, but there's sometimes a sense of a bubbling undercurrent of violence. I think because people are looking for something to do, I suppose. But at the same time, it is the place where David Bowie grew up. So it's clearly the boredom yields something interesting.
I want to know more about the tiny Tom who spoke in your voice.
Well, I always had this voice. I don't know why. And I remember from a young age, people were like, why do you speak like that? Why you got that voice? Why you don't sound like your mum and dad? You sound like that. What's up with you? What's wrong with you? So I'd always be explaining myself. And I don't know. I just have this voice. And it might be because on my mum's side, my mum's background is Irish. So my grandmother and my grandfather moved to England in the war, actually, in the Second World War. But I spent a lot of time with my grandmother growing up. And my dad would say, I think it's because you spent so much time with your grandmother that the Irish accent is a very clear accent. So you've perhaps taken a version of that and that's mixed it with London. But I think it might be true. I'd be happy if it was. But I don't know. I don't know if I just felt eccentric from the moment I could speak and just knew I had to speak differently. But people would be like, why do you talk that? But why? But why though? But why? Are you posh? And of course I wasn't posh. And they'd be like, and I'm like, no. And I'm like, are you gay? And then I'd be like, no, not that.
No.
So, and I was like, I just have to make up these elaborate stories. And I realize now, like, why did I have to do that? I don't know why I talk like that. I just talk the way I talked. Like, people love to go like, but why? But why? But why have you? Why have you done that? Why did you do that? It's like, it's none of your business. I just am. And at the time, though, when you're 11 years old and there's someone in year 9 saying that to you, just go, because I'm sorry. But I never wanted to change it. That's the only thing I did feel. I never wanted to blend in. I think I had a realization that you can either blend in and feel really, really contorted. But I was like, I'm already doing that with the gay stuff. So everything else they can accept. But it wasn't plain sailing, though.
Yeah, it's so interesting, the tussle that you describe in the book in your own mind between wanting to fit in
Yeah.
and not feel ashamed, because fitting in is usually about not feeling ashamed.
Yes.
And also wanting to stand out. And one of my favourite things in the book is one of your earliest memories is wanting to get lost in the supermarket so that your name will be called over the tannoy.
Mum will be like, "Oh, here we go again." Like, yeah, like walking around. I don't know how I managed to do it. I mean, it's a more innocent time when, you could sort of wander around, and Mum would be like, "Look, turning to my dad would be like, look, where has he got? You've lost him again. Where is he?" And then like, "With the parents of Thomas Allen, please come to the information desk. We have him here."
It is I,
Thomas Allen.
I love that.
Yes, very precocious.
So there was something inside you, perhaps from a young age, wanting to be on stage, be in the spotlight. When did that take shape in your mind? When did you start to think, oh, perhaps I could be an actor?
Well, I always thought I wanted to be an actor, and I always thought that was the thing I'd want to do all through my sort of childhood and teenage years. There was always something about being on the stage that appealed. And then when I left school, I realised I didn't really want to be an actor. I was just gay, and basically, if you're sort of a bit flamboyant, I'll say it. I was a bit flamboyant, or precocious, or gay. Potentially, you might be sort of encouraged to do the arts things. We love it in the arts. And the thing is, so we ended up doing drama. I did, or music things. And so I assumed that was what I wanted to do. But really, all I think I wanted was a space to just be, and just sort of be creative, and be allowed to be creative, and be silly, and be funny, and make the other kids laugh, and then make me laugh. And that felt wonderful, really. And we had wonderful teachers who encouraged that. Because I never wanted to, the other kids who just wanted to kick something, they always wanted to kick something, always kicking like a stone or an old cart in the middle, always obsessed with just kicking at something like it was football all the time. And I never wanted to do that. And I was always like, oof, just so uncouth. So I'd prefer to do theatre-y things. What was the question I've just gone off on?
Well, when did you decide to become an actor, if indeed you did decide that?
So it was then, and also I think when I was about 5 or 6, my mum decided that this precociousness needed an outlay, and my mum's always been very encouraging. And as a boy's best friend is his mother, as Norman Bates says, and my mum was always very encouraging, and she took me to the Patricia Hammond School of Dramatic Art, which was above a laundrette next to a fish and chip shop in Belmont Parade in Chislehurst. And so I was taken there, and it was very grandiose. Miss Hammond, our principal, who's still a friend of mine now, would sit at the front of the class, and we would have to perform our poem every week, and she would give us feedback, and we'd be expected to go away and practice it. But I wouldn't, because I was too precocious, and I would just do it again the following week. And she said, "You haven't really changed very much about it, have you? Have you not been doing any work?" And I'd say, "No." But it was a great time to learn, and I learned a lot from her. And but yes, I suppose it's just sort of a space. It was a space to be different, and I suppose I've always felt different.
Yeah, there's a sense in the book of you grasping towards the idea of acting, but always knowing in your heart that it's not quite the right thing.
Well, you've always got to listen to other people do their lines. Or there's always some story about something, and, somebody in Russia. Or, it's just, I didn't care. I just didn't care about their story. Terrible, isn't it?
It's not like Thomas Allen on the tannoy.
It's not like Thomas Allen on the tannoy at all.
That's a much better show.
Or Shakespeare, which I've never been able to understand. Isn't that terrible? As soon as they start going on, I'm like, oh, and the naps I had in theatres as a teenager, when I thought I must like Shakespeare. It's exactly the sort of thing I should like. It fits with my brand. And then I'd get there and I'd be like, what's happened? And then, of course, once you've missed a bit, you don't stand a chance. And I'd be there and so angry. I didn't understand what happened, or why everybody else loved it, why everybody else was laughing at those ridiculous jokes. Like, I am cross-gartered. It's not that funny.
Do you think that
such a damn... Sorry if anybody is.
I'm
sure a lot of people watching this might well be people who laugh at Shakespeare, and they were probably sat behind me at the Littleton Theatre at the National. And I'm sorry that I'm furious that you found it so funny. Sorry.
Well, to each their own, right?
Right. Is that a Shakespeare quote?
No, I don't know. I don't think so. I hope not. It's a bit embarrassing if it is. It's a bit weak.
No,
for Shakespeare.
But it'd be great. That's the sort of thing people who like
To
Shakespeare do.
each their own.
Yeah.
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 I'm wondering if it's sort of mild, unexpressed disappointment with acting and mild, unexpressed disappointment with academia, because sort of academically you didn't quite find your groove, as it were, at school.
Yeah.
Are those the things that contributed to you going towards stand-up?
Oh, well, I did like school. I liked studying. I think that I always wanted to tell stories and I always wanted to talk about things that I'd noticed, because I like to sort of celebrate the things I've seen in the world and kind of acknowledge all the quirks of people I've noticed and our shared insecurities. And I felt very much with school that it makes you jump through a lot of hoops, and I've come to realize I'm quite codependent, I think is the psychotherapist term, but it's one of those terms that I don't really understand, but I seem to tick a lot of the boxes. Basically, you're trying to validate yourself through, or trying to get validation for yourself through other means, largely the approval of other people. So at school, I was constantly trying to do my best, trying to excel, and I realized I hadn't done anything that pleased me. But what I loved about stand-up was that you can talk about whatever you like, and it's about what you notice, and hopefully it's about joy and exuberance and celebrating the world around you. And for me, that's what drew me to stand up. And I'd always liked certain comedians growing up very much, who were largely outsiders and who told stories.
Such as
Victoria Wood was kind of such a big hero for me, because she just had a way of noticing things, and she seemed, the way she performed as a stand-up, it seemed like you saw her as this person who stood in the corner of so many rooms and just observed people, and she was on her own, and she was seemingly kind of an outsider. And I think a lot of people gravitate towards Victoria Wood because of that there's a slight sadness actually as well with it. And I know I felt that as well, of kind of, as a teenager and as an adult, of feeling like I can't quite interact with people, and I don't quite know where I'm supposed to be in the world, and I'm kind of lonely in that. So Victoria Wood really resonated with me. But similarly, I also really loved people like Alan Bennett, and for his storytelling, but also Kenneth Williams for his anecdotes. And again, somebody who always portrayed himself as an outsider who was unhappy and wasn't afraid to be slightly morose, I think. Is that the right word? Or
what were your early experiences of stand-up?
Well, I mean, it was very interesting. I mean, I started out by doing some newcomer competitions. One was the BBC New Comedy Award, one was called So You Think You're Funny, and I won both of them, which was very nice. But it was kind of a blessing and a curse, because it meant that people were like, oh, he's good, this bloke, we'll get him in to do our club. And then I'd turn up with a story about a dessert trolley, or, like my mum's friends or something. And I'd get, and there'd be hen parties and stag parties, braying, like, just wanting something a bit bawdy and a bit raucous. I'd walk out there and start talking about a lemon mousse, and they would be apoplectic. They'd be furious that I was there. I had the audacity to be there and sort of representing, I suppose, for a lot of those stag parties, they could be like, I was everything they disliked, this kind of pretentious 20-something from London, particularly if I travelled outside London, with a posh voice, even though I wasn't posh, but then I'd have to explain that. And they would be furious. And there'd be times, I always challenged myself to try and do every kind of gig I could. And I tried to do some in a chain of clubs that used to exist that were notorious for being a bit rough. And I went on stage, and after a while someone went, get off, you perf. And everybody around him laughed. And I can't blame him. The guy wasn't wrong. But I knew I'd lost the room at that point, and I thought, well, I can't make them laugh now. And I don't know. So I walked off and I went home, and it was in Birmingham, and I got the train back. And then on the following Monday, I got a phone call saying, I hear you had some horrible time there. I said, oh, yes, sorry, yes, thank you for saying that. And they said, oh, because you left the stage early, we can only pay you half the money. And I was like, so kind of like, about it. And I thought I'd been done the right thing. Like, I'm not going to be spoken to like that. I'm going to leave. But then, so that was a bit galling. But I knew, again, I always had this sort of sense somewhere, even though I'd suppressed a lot of myself, I always had this sense of like, I could write a set that would work in that room. But I was determined not to, because I thought then I'll always end up performing to people who don't like me and who I don't like back. And that's the road to unhappiness. And I thought, I've got to stick to my guns, and I've got to find people who do relate to me. And so that's what I set about doing. But that took ages.
But was very much
ages.
worth it.
Well, thank you for saying that.
Yeah. But during that early time, I'm not quite sure of the timing of this, you were not out.
So, yeah.
Is that right?
I wasn't really out on stage. Like, I come out to a couple of friends, but I wasn't out to my mum and dad. So I thought, well, I don't want to talk about something on stage. And what if somebody in the audience knows them? Or what if they've come to see me? And my mum and dad would come and see a lot of my early gigs. So I wouldn't, but it was quite obvious, really. And then I did a gig and I walked off stage and it went well. And I walked off stage and then the compo went, I think he might be gay. And I was like, and my mum and dad were there. And I was like, oh God, oh God. And then the audience laughed all over again. And I was like, don't you do that. But I did find that it was, it felt like, at that point I had no experience of being gay. Because I hadn't had a relationship with anybody and hadn't done anything, really. So I had nothing to base it on. And also I was convinced people would be like, oh yeah, what? Who cares if you're gay? Who cares? But then always were like, does he not realize he's gay? So there'd be this kind of double thing. And then and then after a while I just started talking about it and just was going like, oh, by the way, I'm gay. And people would laugh because obviously. But then I'd do that on television and then people would tweet and go and say things like, oh, why does he keep having to go on about being gay all the time? I'm like, what way do you want it? But they go like, it's not a big deal. Why does he have to keep talking about it? And it's like, well, it was a big deal at a time when you didn't want me to, when I wasn't allowed to talk about it.
Yeah, this is so interesting because this is what I was alluding to earlier, this idea of, is it a big deal? And I think a lot of people like to think, oh, it's not a big deal and we don't have to talk about this anymore. And as you've experienced face to face in front of audiences and through the experience of your life, it is still a big deal. And this idea of saying no shame, it needs to be said.
Well, I think so. I think so. I think for me, obviously I could only speak from my experience, but I hope that kind of is emboldening to anybody who's felt similarly. But it doesn't flick a switch. It's positive that there's been these changes in legislation and there is more representation. But the sense of shame that was ingrained from society, from when I was a small child up until, in my 20s, really, that you don't go, oh, well, great, we've got equal marriage. Great, okay, well, now I feel great. Because the sense of self-loathing is there then. And it takes time to overcome that. And I don't know how, it's not something that's easily achieved. And I think that still pervades for me now in lots of ways. And I dare say it does for a lot of people. You can't, it's harder to be happy with yourself. And for me, I think sometimes the stories that I remember seeing, which were very inspiring in lots of ways when television stories first started covering, had gay characters or whatever, felt very exciting. But often the narrative would be quite linear. And even like films you see now, quite linear about, if the gay person is struggling or they've experienced homophobia, they do one thing and then they triumph over it and then it's done. And so what I enjoyed about writing the book was that it affords you to be able to show that actually the path is very winding. And often you do quite ridiculous things along the way because you don't know what else to do. And I quite like that. I quite like that sort of foible or quirkiness that human beings have. And I thought it was important to represent that as well, that the path to self-acceptance and as Americans would say, self-love, but we're British, so we won't, but is often quite, what is the word? Circuitous. So yeah, I think it felt important to say, and yeah, so yes.
I think lots of people will talk to you about this now that you've explored it in the book. And I'm wondering if people already did talk to you about it because of what you talk about in your stand-up. Do you think that this experience is quite common, maybe more common than we think? I
think so. I think, like I say, in narratives we are often shown, like they do, the character will do one thing to overcome their issue and then they'll all be fine. And then they'll have a partner immediately, or they come out to the world, and then the person they fancied actually fancies them back, And I was like, it was never like that for me. And I think that a lot of us maybe have experienced that it's not simple. And I get it. Like my friend Susie Ruffles said to me, we were laughing about it, we have a podcast together. And, we talk a lot about LGBTQIA plus issues. And I said, I love the film Pride, and I cried a lot. And I said, yeah, but I wish I'd, just turned up at Pride and then found all these wonderful friends and then had this wonderful adventure. And she said, yeah, but if the film Pride had been based on your life, it would have involved the main character walking around trying to make eye contact with someone, and then someone would just glance at him. Then he'd fall in love with them. Then he'd start crying, and the film would be about 11 hours long. and so I do get why things have to be truncated. And so, yes. But I think that I wonder if a lot of people have not had that expressed. I know I hadn't anyway, of kind of the complexity of it and finding a partner, because essentially it's a numbers game. For straight people, you walk into any party. You walk into a party with you walk out of your door. I mean, literally, they're saying the boy next door, the girl next door, like there'll be somebody probably on your street you could at least flirt with. But if you're not straight, it's really difficult, I think, to find those people, to have those, when you're a teenager even, everybody else is able to kind of have their failed relationships and talk about fancying someone, have a crush. But if, I wasn't allowed to talk about it, so it had to be buried. And I don't think that's very healthy. And then that affects your confidence when you're expected to be all the more daring to go out and meet people, where when you can't go out to your local pub to meet people potentially, or certainly before, like online dating, you couldn't. You'd have to go into London or go into a city and go to a gay bar that was that you wouldn't know anybody, and that felt very vulnerable because it's quite scary, but often very nice as well. But you meet nice people, but I hope it is it resonates with some people, and not just gay people, of course, but anybody who's ever felt like an outsider. I sort of wanted to represent all those things that I felt, and I hope it makes them feel less alone.
I know people will be watching this right now and thinking, I wonder if Tom is single. So I need to ask you that question. And I also want to tell you that I was heartbroken to read you saying that you've never been in love.
Oh.
Is that true? And
yeah.
Are you single?
I am single. And yeah.
Really never been in love?
I've never been in love. And I think I've had lots of, relationships that I've been emotionally involved in. But I think I don't know, I guess I've never really allowed myself the time or the space to do that without seeming very mawkish. But I suppose it's just sort of, I don't know. I don't know how you do that. But I feel like there's potentially actually other people out there that have felt like that. And again, I suppose we get fed so many narratives where it's like, so you go on some dates and then you find the one and then you get married and then everything's fine. And like I say, I've been very lucky, and I've had relationships with people who I've cared about very much. And I've learned a lot from about myself. But yeah, I've not been in love in the sort of like we're in love way. And actually, the more I've sort of as time has gone on, the more I've actually chosen to quite like it and quite embrace it. So maybe I'm cutting off my nose to spite my face by going, oh, no, I don't need anybody. But I don't know. But I think actually there's quite a lot of people out there that may be similar. Maybe
well, and also quite a lot of people out there living with their parents.
Oh yeah,
right,
right, sure. But it's very difficult to have a relationship when you're not allowed to meet anybody outside of your bubble. So, I mean, it does get a bit Oedipal.
Do you still live in the house that you grew up in?
Yeah.
So you've always lived in the same house?
Well, I did live away from home for a time. I moved out when I was about 23 or 24. And I lived in Camden, and then I lived in Brixton. And then I moved home when I was about 30 because I just wanted to focus on work. And I just wanted to be able to kind of reset. It was around about the time I talk about being told to get off stage at Perth. Around about that time, I realised I actually wanted the support base of people I knew and loved, and just needed the stability of that humdrum suburban life. See, it does have its it's
Well,
positives.
yeah, and it's been a rich seam of material
Well,
as well.
Well, I suppose for me, at the time, I felt ashamed of that again, of like, why aren't I doing what other people do? It's so easy to be comparative, isn't it? And I thought, why I shouldn't be living here. This isn't where people my age group live. This isn't where like arty, cool people live. But actually, and what I found, and sort of what I learned with putting it on paper for the book, is that actually, if you flip it and go, actually, what I've got is great, then you celebrate that. And then you feel much more emboldened. You don't feel that shame.
Mm. So you moved back in with your parents when you were 30.
Yes.
Which is an amazing
Perfect time.
sentence to be able to say.
Yes.
And really, eventually, that your plan worked. You found your voice in your stand-up. You started to really own the space that you were in and be able to say what you wanted to say, not have to compromise what you're saying to win over certain audiences that you didn't want. And very quickly, it paid off.
Well, after a time, yes. It did, I suppose. And I think, like I say, I came to realize that even though I was like, yeah, I'll live in Kentish Town and I'll be cool and I'll go to all these gay bars and I'll be like this character from Tales of the City or something. And I wasn't authentically me somehow. And I suppose I guess the thing I came to learn is that you are better as a stand-up when you know who you are. And essentially, I am a boy from Bromley who has a really nice, caring family who he quite likes to take the piss out of, and they are quite eccentric in their ways, buying kitchens that they haven't measured, for example.
And of the things that you've been doing recently, how many of them have continued over the last few months during this difficult time? So, have you been recording for lots of the shows that you do? How has that been?
Yeah, we've been. It's been amazing what's been done with the guys who make the Bake Off. So we were absolutely delighted that we could then do Extra Slice. They've been really incredible with making that work in a socially distanced way. And everyone at Channel 4 has been so great. In fact, all the television channels have, and all the production companies. Fundamentally, they love making stuff, as does everybody in front of the camera. We're the show-offs, though. But they do too. They like us showing off, which is nice. And they've gone all out to make it work within the guidelines, and everybody's been very safe. So it's tremendous, really.
Do you really love that job? You look as if you really love it.
I do really love it. I love that. And also, oh yes, I was going to say as well, there's something about movies, which I've been doing for Sky, which is hosted by Alan Carr. And that was the first thing I did after lockdown. And they were like the first to do that, and it was amazing that they made it work. But I'm sorry.
Yeah, well, I want to know what it's like when you're in the room with the people and their really awful cakes.
Oh, our lovely contributors.
Whether you ever think, oh, I better not be too mean.
You know what? Whenever I do that, I have regretted it. So, and at first when I started doing it, because people just used to bring along their cakes, and Joe, when it was on the BBC, Joe would say, "Show us your bakes," and then they'd just go, "Yeah." And that was it. And then they'd have a bit of a chat during the show. But then innocently they came along expecting the same thing when it was on Channel 4. And then I jumped out with a whisk and was like, "What have you brought?" And I think they were actually they did take it in good humour. But it was so fun to do. And I think at times they'd be like, "What? Oh, is it me?" Somebody called like Linda from Berkshire would, but I always thought she'd punch me in the face, but she didn't. She didn't exist, by the way. But yeah, they've been really lovely, and actually kids seem to really enjoy it, which I'm always like bemused by. But I guess I can see why, because children get a world where like, oh, that's really good. Oh, your painting is lovely. Oh, I'm going to put that on the fridge, even though it's not very good. And so actually, somebody going, well, it's not a very good cake. What have you tried? How long does this take you? All day. It's awful. You should be ashamed. I mean, it's not. It's playful. They seem to like that. Go, oh, I didn't know you could be mean. And I try and do it in a way that's sort of spoofing that kind of tabloidy, like, oh, look at them. Oh, they tried, but it didn't work out. Oh, yeah, well, oh, their career. Oh, they thought they were brilliant, but they weren't. Like all of that voice, you can see I can access it quite easily. I remember that growing up, like the Daily Mail being around. Sorry if you're watching. But they'd be like, oh, look at them. Oh, they did that. Oh, they thought they were good, but then look, and then they did this shameful thing, and let's hope their career ends soon. And I think what I'm trying to sort of do is spoof that in a way that makes it able that people can laugh at it and pierces the balloon and
Yeah,
takes away
that's
its sting.
interesting. I
think that's what motivates me to do it, to take away. Then we can all laugh at meanness, and then then it loses its power.
You pantomime shame the cakes, basically. Yeah. I'm wondering what it's like behind the scenes at The Apprentice. You're fired.
Well, it's lovely. I have to say, it's great doing that show because it's very different to doing, say, Extra Slice, where Bake Off is a very loving environment. Everybody's very warm, lots of floral tea towels in a marquee. And then they come on our show and I can be quite mean. You can play with that idea. But on The Apprentice, it's already quite a mean place. So actually we tried to make Apprentice You're Fired quite a silly, fun show and just sort of poke fun at the kind of silliness of it. And we had the best time. Like, we did a Busby Berkeley tap routine at the end of the last series to We're in the Money, which was so ridiculous. But like the producing team there and everyone at the BBC were like, yeah, do it. Like on the first episode, they were like, we came up with the idea of kind of dressing up as Karen Brady. And that would how I'd walk out for the first episode. And they said, well, we better clear that with Karen. And they said, we've spoken to Karen, she loves it. And so we're all on board. And so we had such a tremendous time just having fun, really. And again, I think it does come back to the book a bit, is that shame is used to go, don't have fun, stop being silly, sit down, don't make a fool of yourself. And actually, if you're allowed to be exuberant and fun and poke fun at things in a way that's loving, then actually it becomes a celebration. And actually, we're all living our best life in a way. Because we're I don't know. It's filling the balloon to the most it can be filled. And I hope that's what comes across with it anyway. That when we don't have to be, because we can still be done lovingly and hopefully and still be done with respect. The things we care about actually are the things we like to cherish and make fun of. And I think that's maybe that's something about a lot of like gay humor, maybe, I don't know. But
yeah, making fun of the things that we really care about.
Yeah, in a way that can seem quite spiky, but actually is because you love it.
Yeah. There's a lot in your stand-up and a lot in the book about your parents and the surrounding neighbours and friends. And I'm wondering what they make of your career and what do they tune in to watch you?
Well, I'm always worried that I'm going to talk about something that includes them in some way. And I'm like, Dad, you need to speak to blah, blah, because I'm going to talk about that. And then I hear back, they're like, they loved it. They absolutely loved it. I'm like, really? I mean, I'm telling all these things about them. Like, no, they enjoy it. Don't worry about it. So I guess there's something heartening about that I guess probably everybody likes to be made fun of in a way because it's playful, isn't it?
I just think it's so sweet the way your parents come across in the book, because as we've made clear from the beginning of this conversation, this wasn't about them making you feel uncomfortable about your sexuality. Like, the shame doesn't lie there. And it's just really interesting how it was always something was just around. And you mentioned this idea of that Daily Mail sensibility and the time when I feel like you're too young to sort of remember the outing of George Michael and Elton John.
It's
like
huge.
all of those things were sort of really part of the national conversation. And it's just so interesting and sort of saddening to me that you took all of that in, because you didn't need to feel that way. That's what's so really touching about the book, is that you go on this long journey, you explain it all, you make it funny, you take the sting out of it. But at the end, you're kind of saying, I don't really need to go through that. And I don't want anyone else to go through that.
Yeah, I mean, very much so. Yeah, I guess I was like, actually, I suppose what I wanted to also explore is the complexity of some of those feelings, that often it's like you feel shame because this one thing happened to you. And actually, like with any human experience, whatever it is, it's what happens at the end of a number of different tiny things. And I suppose I wanted to reach out and sort of go, it's not, it's okay if you can't explain it, but it's still there. And I think once we are allowed to talk about things, that's the most important thing. And I guess that's what I love about stand-up, is that it's a forum for different people to come and talk. And the more we talk, the more we come to understand each other. And that's a good thing. And if we laugh along the way, it's hopefully a part of the celebration of that. And we come to, grow, learn and as my dad has often said, you can never have too much love. There's not a finite amount.
Sounds a bit EastEnders, that.
It does sound a bit, doesn't it? Never have too much love. But it's true that the quality of mercy is not strained, as Portia says. I think maybe in The Merchant of Venice. I don't.
Back to Shakespeare.
Just did,
keep going back to Shakespeare.
I just thought I'd throw that in because I remember doing that at GCSE English. That was the only time I did it. Thank you very much, teachers.
I wonder if some of this idea of shame, and you've hinted at this, and it's definitely an undercurrent in the book, is to do with a certain kind of Britishness and a certain kind of awareness of class. Because as you say, yes, a lot of it has been about sexuality, and that's how it affected you. But I do think lots of people will read this and see your experience and feel that sense of, like you were saying, that voice of you mustn't do this because you're X. And why do you have to talk like that? And that can often be a class thing. Do you think it is a British thing?
Absolutely. I learned a lot about that. I wasn't really, we talk about class quite a lot in this country, and it exists everywhere, I think. And a lot of the time places will go, well, actually, we don't have a class structure in this country. You go like, well, that's probably just because you're on the upper echelons of it. You don't experience it. But that's my theory. But I think that in this country, class is very, very, very much pervades. And I realized how the intergenerational sense of that is important. For example, writing about my mum's family, my grandparents moved from Ireland during the Second World War, and my grandmother was always very aware, very self-conscious of being Irish. It was very, she felt very aware of being an outsider, and I think it wasn't a particularly easy time for Irish people in this country, and I think she bless her, suffered from that and that feeling of, so therefore she would make sure that she always looked immaculate and always kept up appearances and everything had to be perfect, and she would worry about what other people thought. I guess it's about, feeling self-conscious about moving from somewhere else, but also about, like I say, class and being working class. And that was, so much shame was heaped on that for people. And certainly as well on my dad's side as well. He grew up with his mum. His dad left him in 1941, which I can't imagine how difficult that would have been. And so she had to bring him up in one room in Penge, Emily. And they had no running water until he fixed it. And you go, that sort of experience has an impact which you pay forward. And I talk about that in the book, because I think for a lot of people, we live in an age when, well, I've got an iPhone, I'm fine. And actually, you forget that there's the sense of imposter syndrome and the sense of not being quite right and having to impress other people really does come from that. And it wasn't that long ago that people had nothing, had so little. And when you think workhouses were closed in 1924, that sense of kind of Dickensian poverty, it doesn't go away overnight. These issues kind of still are in the common consciousness. I don't mean common as in the class sense, but they're in collective consciousness. And I think I think it's an issue that's never really talked about. And I think the fact that impacts on access to education, access to support, access to what career paths people pursue, is often because people don't have that experience, don't have the experience in their family, just the sheer practicalities of like, well, a young person might have the ability to become a barrister, but if they don't have anybody in the family who knows what the path is to get there, what chance do you stand? And it's such a tragedy that, again, I think of the life half lived, the wasted life that could have been so much more, but because of circumstance isn't afforded. And I suppose I feel still very passionately about that that we forget that it doesn't just go away overnight. And I think it's something that the conversation should be talked about more.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. I'm also, as you were talking, I was imagining you saying that as a 7-year-old.
Probably would have done.
Which you probably would have done.
At the children's table at a wedding.
Yeah,
and all
wearing
the kids being like,
exactly this outfit.
Yeah,
yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
And the other kids being like, oh, shut up.
Now, seeing as we're celebrating the publication of this wonderful book, I am wondering if you, as a published author, could recommend to us what else you like to read?
There's nothing else, just this. No. Well, I always really loved the Tales of the City books. By
Armistead Maupin. Yes.
Is it, I never know. I used to say it Maupin.
Yes, I have interviewed him.
Have you?
And it is Maupin.
Maupin.
Yeah.
I didn't think he was from New York.
Yeah. Or that was my San Francisco accent. But it's not Maupin. It's not Maupin.
Oh, Maupin.
But I think we should say Maupin anyway. Armistead Maupin, Tales of the City.
Tales of the City.
Yeah.
One of my
wonderful.
favourite books because they're very happy. I was given those books in my early 20s, and it was the first time I'd actually read about, like, queer people. I say queer. I think some people find that still quite triggering. But I kind of like it in terms of like queer theory. Outsiders, it's a bit more broader to include anybody maybe who doesn't fit in the mainstream. Anyway, I like Tales of the City for that happiness to it, even though it has lots of tragically sad moments. But it has a joy about it, which I really loved. And I like that. I also like to read Hilary Mantel. Love the Wolf Hall series.
Do you?
Just disappear in those. I didn't know I wanted to know that much about the Tudors. I didn't really learn about them at school. We were doing what did we do instead? I think we did like the Egyptians. It's very project based.
Maybe Hilary Mantel could tackle that next.
I would love it if you could, Hilary.
Yeah. And in terms of things that you enjoy on TV, stand up, what you might watch if we went into another lockdown.
Oh, what are my recommendations?
Yeah. What's your binge watch?
Oh, that's a good shout. I love a sitcom really. So I quite like an American sitcom. So I've really got into Broad City over the last lockdown, which was so funny. And I don't know why it wasn't talked about more here. It was only somebody told me about it. And I was like, oh yeah, I'll give that. Listen, Amy Poehler produces some of them. I think some of them from the second series on. It's so great. It's these two girls living in New York as flatmates and best friends going on adventures. That's basically it, but they're so funny. It's so brilliant. And it really it feels really modern, really like of our age of kind of, I don't know, it's great. Really great series. And what else would I recommend to watch? So many things.
Also thinking about stand-up, who do you think people should check out? Obviously, Susie Ruffell.
Susie Ruffell.
People don't already know her
If people
work.
don't know her. So many great people I want to list. I'll miss people out. But if people don't know Mae Martin is great. And actually her series came out at the beginning of lockdown. That was phenomenal. I love Mae. And Mae's been such a support of me. So much. Such a great friend as well. So Mae, Susie, Lou Sanders, Phil Dunning is brilliant.
No, these are all very good recommendations.
I'm going to remember more people on town.
And obviously, stand-up is in a difficult place at the moment because of the closure of theatres and gig spaces. But for you, is that where you feel like you're happiest and you'll always want to do stand-up shows, or are you really feeling comfortable on TV and that's what you want to do now?
I think I like all of them, really. I like the thing about stand-up is it is that live experience, and it is that thing of it happens that time and that time only with those people in that room. I like that specificity of it.
Do you miss it? Have you missed it?
Yeah, really like just interacting with people and just being in a room and it being a live experience, I think. But I take heart in the fact that as soon as we're allowed out again, people will hunger after it so much more. And people are doing amazing things online as well, I'd say. And you realise like so many comics have found ways of kind of putting it onto social media or whatever. Al Green does these amazing little sketches that just so brilliantly satirise just little characters in our world. You know, like, for example, the kind of those sort of pious people that seem to emerge during the lockdown who are like, again, pouring shame on people or always being very judgy of other people. Just those things. And I think actually, if we can find ways to make it work online, then that's great too. It's an added bonus. But I would say to anybody out there, do just go on a little search of people and see what you find. Because you might find somebody who does really quirky, strange things. I suppose a lot of the time when it's just a camera and a person, you get that bit more nuanced. People are doing a bit more nuanced, a bit more stuff that's kind of about stuff that might not fly in a big room of people, but you might get. And that's the best bit, isn't it? When you find something that somebody says and you go, I felt that too.
Yeah, well, it's that idea of what you're saying before about wanting to make people feel less alone.
Yeah.
And I really feel as if your book will do that. Let me put you on the spot for one final question.
Sure.
If you had to describe the ideal reader of this book, look, we have to say thank you to all the people who've already bought their book with ticket. And for everyone else, please do go and pick up your copy of this book. And if you've already got one, buy another one.
Why not?
Because everybody needs this as a gift.
Exactly. They make great coasters as well because my face is quite round, so people know where to put their cup.
Who would be your ideal reader of this book? And did you have them in mind when you were writing it?
No, not really. No, I don't think so. I mean, any outsider. And I would love to think it's I would love to think it's somebody who feels like they're the only person in the world that feels like that, and hopefully they can take some heart or inspiration from it. I would love to think if it's somebody like that, maybe a young person having similar experiences to what I went through. But at the same time, I'd like the idea that it might be the most unexpected person who I wouldn't have thought would enjoy it, who might, who's not maybe had the same experiences as me, but still finds something to relate to in them, which I think there is something for those people, for anybody, I hope to. But that would be nice. But it was the scariest bit was showing it to my mum and dad. They went off into separate rooms and read it, and I had to sort of sit outside like it was an exam. They both, luckily, liked it, which is handy because I do talk about them a lot to comedic effect.
And you live with them.
And indeed I live with them.
Well, I'm sure that it will find a brilliant audience because it's a wonderful book. And I'm so grateful to you for talking to us today. Tom Allen, thank you so much.
Thank you, Viv. Thank you very much for joining me.